that there are locations that are going to be necessary with respect to the Operations Golden Dome is absolutely an essential issue. And the Golden Dome is going to be very, very important. We have other locations that are essential, critical infrastructure overall, where we don't own. And I think certainly Greenland and the Greenlanders need to decide their future and their outcome. I think this is more of an issue of asking them to join us as opposed to are the deal.
So that's some of the support this Sunday for the president's plan, but there are also Republicans strongly against forcing the acquisition of Greenland, whether it's through military or by any other means.
On the war powers or on militarily invading Greenland, I've heard of no Republican support for that, even though most hawkish members of our caucus have said they won't support that. So I think it's going to be very difficult. I think he keeps rattling the cage saying that. But as far as trying to buy it peacefully, you don't get purchasers to come around by berating them and telling them you'll take it anyway.
Right. So if he wants to purchase Greenland, that's one thing. But for him to militarily invade would turn Article 5 of NATO on its very head and, in essence, put us at war with NATO itself. It would end up abolishing NATO as we know it, an organization that has lasted for over 4 to 5 decades and protected us from world wars.
Joining me now to unpack all of this is CNN European Affairs commentator Dominic Thomas. Dominic, it's great to see you again.
Thanks for having me on, Paulo.
So if this is more than just cage rattling, as the Kentucky Senator just described it, if President Trump's threat to take Greenland materializes, are there zero scenarios in which NATO, which is now nearly 77 years old, in which that alliance survives?
It would seem completely, impossible, Paulo. It's built and protected by its various articles to precisely avoid that. It's unprecedented. So ultimately, we don't know. But given the energy that President Trump has put in the last few years into pushing NATO members to contribute, to enhance the role and their commitment and demonstrably show that commitment to NATO, I think that question of survivability is, of course, raised. But beyond that, the question of weaponizing tariffs and so on against these allies as a path forward for occupying sovereign territory is really what NATO and NATO members are finding so incredibly problematic here.
And then there's, of course, the what would happen next. So if we do see a takeover of Greenland, if the most powerful member of NATO were to do the exact thing that the alliance is designed to prevent, as you just pointed out, what options do then the European members have?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think at the moment what's happening is we have an administration, Trump administration, that is clearly emboldened by Operation Absolute Resolve. That Venezuela is not NATO, it's not Europe, and it's not the European Union. And there's a clear red line here that has been crossed. And what's interesting is that European citizens have absolutely no interest in Greenland becoming the 51st state of the US. They've been vocal about this, and European leaders are, of course, answerable to them. They spent the past year accommodating President Trump, trying to work with him over various deals, trying to maintain his commitment to conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And invading a member of the NATO alliance sends a very wrong message in the broader context of the Sustainable Peace Accord and the deterrence that these allies are trying to achieve here. What's so problematic about this is it's not just the invasion; it's the rhetoric of war that President Trump has been employing, designating essentially an enemy that is an ally since post-World War II, and then subsequently through membership of NATO, through what are essentially tariff attacks. And I think that's what's so particularly problematic at this stage, and therefore complicates the path forward should they decide to make a military incursion into Greenland.
And Dominic, I'm glad you mentioned Venezuela. I know you previously shared with us that it's quite possible that President Trump could perhaps feel emboldened by the actions in Venezuela earlier this year. I'm curious if you can maybe expand on that.
Well, first of all, we're talking here about not somebody with whom there is an asymmetrical relationship as there was with Venezuela. We're talking about Europe here. We're talking about a European Union with a massive trade sector. And let's not forget that the current deal between the United States and the European Union was accelerated and is now stalled to avoid a trade war. So once again, this kind of rhetoric of conflict and so on. President Trump cannot bully Europe in the way that he has bullied Venezuela or is talking about other countries here. Europeans don't want it. NATO members don't want it. What they are interested in and are willing to work with him is on a security deal or some kind of greater or enhanced program of security in the Arctic. But as you mentioned earlier, as they deployed troops there last week, they were met with an aggressive response from the US president, which I think underlines that is not his interest. His interest in securing control of the critical minerals, and that is absolutely a red line that cannot be crossed, and that sends a very wrong message globally to other countries such as Russia. And that's a concern for Europe that's on the front lines of all of these conflicts, to the east with Russia, and on the other side now it looks like with the United States.
What about the United States in the eyes of the world? Obviously, the president showing no sign of backing down despite some strong opposition both in and outside the United States. How do you think this risk is really, or how does this risk flipping the perception of the U.S. around the world, given what we've seen just in recent weeks?
Yeah. President Trump has been, and his administration have been effective with messaging and communication, and in particularly the ways in which they've disseminated their message through disruptive far-right political parties in places like Europe and elsewhere. And over certain questions, there's a sort of a Venn diagram of understanding of actions that have been taken, whether justified or not, when it comes to immigration and so on and so forth. That as they observe unfolding on global media networks, social media platforms and so on, internal protests and resistance to these policies in the United States, alongside a fatigue over conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And as they see the ways in which this foreign policy is now being implemented, they got to read the security agreement, but seeing that President Trump will not stop with these incursions, and they are now impacting Europeans on their territory in this particular case. And I think that raises concerns elsewhere in the world about what the next steps will look like. And I think that the vocal protests abroad are indicative of this will to resist President Trump after this last year of uncertainty and unpredictability.
Dominic Thomas, always grateful to have your analysis. Thank you so much for staying up late for us.
Thank you, Paulo.
Of course. And some Greenlanders are certainly taking this threat quite serious. In fact, survival gear, it has become a hot commodity in Greenland as locals worry about the possibility of military action. Sales of items like camping stoves, freeze-dried meals, and also some dried foods, well, those sales are up. Protesters in Greenland's capital, they express their frustrations with Donald Trump and also the instability that he has brought to their lives.
I live in danger. I also don't get so much sleep because in all the news there, I see this about Donald Trump wants to buy Greenland. And Greenland is not for sale, and we will never be for sale.
Stomachache, nervousness. What is this going to end? Because I know he won revenge, and he's. I don't know any nice words about him.
I've completely lost for words for what he's doing now. It's just completely insane.
We'll get you to a developing story now. At least 21 people are dead after two high-speed trains derailed in southern Spain.